Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Winfree, and what you're about to listen to is an old episode of a podcast I used to host called Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. This is another part of my look through comic villains for that. I had done quite a number of shows before really kind of sinking into the comic world in a more significant way. I think I'd done the Hulk before this, but I kind of just thought, all right, this period of time we're just going to go through a lot of different comic properties, and I had a bunch of people who were happy to talk them with me, so pretty easy to schedule. And this was the third in that series. It started with the X-Men, then Mark and I talked Joker. Here, myself and Pat Mullin talked Doctor Doom, the antagonist of the Fantastic Four and one of the major villains of the entire Marvel world of comics. He became the God Emperor at one point. Like, Doom's a big deal. This also kind of was spurred on by a bit of a bet between Mark and Pat about whether or not the Joker or Doctor Doom was the better comic villain. They each got a show, and we kind of decided whichever show gets more listens, that will be the correct answer, because Traffic Generation was king even back when this first aired. The original air date for this, by the way, March 7th, 2014, which is one of the reasons you will hear zero discussion of the 2015 Four-Stick movie. We don't talk about that anymore after as well, because God, that movie sucks. But that's why there's no discussion at all of that iteration of the characters, because the movie hadn't come out yet, and the world was a better place. The world was a much better place before that movie was made. Just throwing that out there. So anyway, this is myself and Pat Mullin talking Doctor Doom across comics, television, movies, etc., and what an interesting character he is, so on and so forth. So you all know the drill by now. Thank you very, very much for listening. As always, please interact with the product, and I hope you enjoy the show.
When the devil is too busy and death a bit too much, they call on me by name, you see, for my special touch. To the gentlemen, I'm misfortune. To the ladies, I'm surprise. But call me by any name, anyway, it's all the same. I'm the fly in your suit, I'm the pebble in your shoe, I'm the bee beneath your bed, I'm the bump on every head, I'm the heel on which you slip, I'm the pin in every head, I'm the thorn in your side, makes you wriggle and writhe, and it's so easy when you're evil. This is the life you see, the devil tips his hat to me, I do it all because I'm evil, and I do it all for free. Your tears are all the pay I'll ever need.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for joining us here on Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. I am your host, the authority on evil, Mr. Robert Winfree. Hope you're all doing well whenever and however you're choosing to join us. And again, I'd like to thank you for doing so. I'm going to get right into business this week. No extended plugs, no gimmicks, no crappy jokes, of which I have a plethora. But just a brief, kind of introduction here. When I announced that I was going to start doing a big series of shows focusing on comic book bad guys, that announcement started a lively debate between two frequent guests of this show and friends of mine in the form of Mark Radulich and Pat Mullin. They were debating who was the best comic villain of all time, and debating between Magneto. He's the other guy who tends to be up there, but in this case they were debating Doctor Doom and the Joker. So I figured, let's let each of them have their say. And last week, talked about the Joker. I had Mark on. We had a great time. I enjoyed that show a great deal. I enjoy all my shows. What can I say? And, well, this week we're going to hear I've hit the main three already. I did Magneto when I talked about the X-Men. I've done the Joker. Now we're doing Doctor Doom. It's all downhill from here, it seems like. God, I'm going to have to come up with some kind of gimmick for the rest of these. But Today we're talking Doctor Doom, the arch nemesis of the Fantastic Four, the mega villain of the Marvel Universe, and I've got Pat himself, the man from the 80s, who apparently shares my distaste for Neil Patrick Harris. But Pat Mullin, welcome back. Glad to have you.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Robert. I just happened to get back in from a Latvian town hall meeting in Doomstadt.
Yeah, how'd that go? So your dragon tattoo, is that still coming along, or what?
I need a little bit of a touch-up at the end of the forearm, but it's looking pretty good.
All right. Now, again, when I mentioned this, when I brought up this topic, you kind of drew your line in the sand and said Doom is the greatest ever. Now, I'm going to get in later on. I want to get into why Doom is not as well known and as highly regarded as various other comic book villains. But are you a big Fantastic Four fan? Was that your introduction to the character of Doom, or was he kind of a Spider-Man guest shot and you thought, man, that guy looks awesome? I mean, how did you come to enjoy the character much?
I've been reading comics since I learned how to read. Mainly, Marvel, because that's what I was brought up on. But, with DC here and there, too, and certain characters, caught my interest. But the thing about Doctor Doom was every comic book has, and every comic book hero has a particular rogues gallery where you'll see this guy always show up to fight a certain hero, and really nobody else. Doom was the first guy I remember reading showing up pretty much anywhere he darn well pleased. And that just struck out to me that, this guy's kind of a big deal if I can read Fantastic Four and he shows up and causes them headaches. The next month, I can pick up a copy of the Avengers and he's in there with another scheme putting those guys to work. I can pick up something as random as an issue of Moon Knight or The Punisher and find Doctor Doom pretty much trying something on being up to no good as usual. He's arguably crossed over more titles in his particular comic universe than any other villain in any other universe, and has crossed paths with more heroes, and even some outside of the Marvel universe, and we'll get to that a little bit later as well, but he's just kind of an omnipresent evil in the Marvel universe, and I think that's more than anything what set him apart, is that Doom is a threat to everybody. And when you establish that, that's pretty cool.
Well, I believe he was the first kind of mega villain when you get into, kind of to people who study comics for a living, which is apparently a thing. You mentioned that everyone had their own rogues gallery, so to speak, and there wasn't a whole lot of crossover. And then Doom was, started showing up, other places. He messed with Spider-Man, Moon Knight, Avengers, Punisher. He's kind of a big deal. And he was one of the first guys to do that. And, I mean, you could argue that without him kind of setting that precedent, you don't get guys like Apocalypse who crosses over. You don't necessarily get, huge baddies like Thanos. Insert various mega villains here. But he was the first one to really kind of go, I can be wherever I want if I have something to gain from it. If there's some way for this to benefit me, I'll show up and mess with Spider-Man.
Yeah, and Spider-Man was actually the first book that he appeared in outside of the book that's considered his main appearance go-to, and that's the Fantastic Four, obviously. He's really known as their arch-villain, particularly to Reed Richards, who he has a long and storied history with. But he crossed over shortly after his appearance into an issue of Spider-Man. From there, he involved himself with Namor the Submariner, and he became such a popular cat villain that he was arguably the first villain to really star in an ongoing title that was created, and I mean this is a villain who was created solely for the comic medium, because you had older entries like pulp villains like Fu Manchu and people like that, but in the 70s, Marvel created a title supervillain team-up based solely around stories they could do for Doctor Doom.
He's, I'll tell you, the first time I was aware of the character, the first time I really, and I'm going to throw out maybe some, credit to for any of you who don't know, I write in the MMA zone of 411mania.com. I tend to frequent the other zones of the site. And one of the topics that I kind of find myself, before I started doing this and whatnot, but I looked through, there's like 3 or 4 different columns every week in the movies and television zone that deal specifically with comics. And I can't remember whose it was. It might have been Jeremy Thomas. Or, like I said, there's 3 or 4 of them, and I forget who writes them. But this was kind of start of the running gag where if Magneto's in a poll, Magneto wins it. But it was debating, favorite villains, and somebody mentioned Doctor Doom was one of the poll members, and someone in the comments section phrased it like this, and it kind of stuck with me. He said, no, it should be Doom, because First of all, he's the smartest man in the universe, and then in parentheses he had suck it Reed Richards. He's made the best He's made the best armor in the Marvel universe, in parentheses suck it Tony Stark. And in his spare time became the second greatest sorcerer in the universe, in parentheses I guess as you were Strange. And I don't know what it was about that, but it kind of stuck out to me.
Well, I mean, look at how much that encompasses of just what a true, threat this guy is to everybody. Doom's armor, I think at one point Tony Stark said it makes his armor look like a science project he threw together in the 6th grade at the last minute at one point.
If you look at I believe it's the one of the animated series, I think Armored Adventures for Iron Man, he says Doom's armor makes his look like a toaster arms.
Well, the less said about Iron Man Armored Adventures, the better. But that quote's probably pretty accurate. I mean, and that's part of what makes Doom so cool too, is just the presentation that he has, because it's part, it's and the inspiration for Darth Vader's look was partially taken from Dr. Doom. This armored, but at the same time regal-looking character, and they did such a good job of making him look threatening, menacing, and powerful in this suit of armor like a knight, a medieval knight, but combining it with these robes and the crests that hold the robe and cape on together. It's a look that was completely unique at the time. And if you look at a lot of villains, they've had tweaks to their armor made here and there, and Doom had tweaks done to his initial appearance, but by about the 4th appearance he made, his look has been virtually the same to this day from that 4th appearance or so, whereas other villains, they've always gone through either some sort of costume change or major appearance change. And I think it says a lot about his perception that you really haven't had to do that with him.
Well, I believe
his look is iconic.
I think Jack Kirby said that at least part of the inspiration was from various depictions of death as an entity, because you tend to see the skeletal figure with the hood and the capes, and he took some of the inspiration for how to design him from various medieval representations of death.
Yeah, and again, you're talking medieval where the standard was, the Grim Reaper with the scythe and the robe, and you combine that with, what are some of the most popular medieval figures, the knights, the ones who do battle, and you have this awesome package that Kirby puts together like no one else ever did. And it's that iconic look that really has not changed since 1962.
Yeah, and like you said, it's rare that any design stands up that long and that well. I mean, everyone else has changed to one degree or another. Doom's pretty static. So all right, you mentioned, you and I kind of talked off here, and I figured, we may as well get into this now. Doom is not as well known as maybe he should be outside of kind of the comic universe. Like you just said, here's a guy who shows up in pretty much any title he wants. He can be written into any of them, and it can make sense. As a character, he's very intriguing. He's very menacing. He's got all the great traits, but for some reason, he's not as well known. If I were to walk up to a bunch of, to random people on the street and say, I'm doing a list of greatest comic book villains. Joker gets up there because of his exposure, Magneto maybe, and then everyone's kind of, I don't. Where do you go after the big ones? You might get the occasional Red Skull or Loki since, the Marvel films have started to become popular. But Doom does not get the respect he deserves. And given that, I'm kind of curious, what's your... He's been in a fair number, even if just like one-shots of various... on television and in a couple of films. So I'm curious as to your favorite interpretation of him outside of the written, outside of the comics, that might, to anyone who hasn't seen him or isn't aware of him, you could kind of point out and go, okay, if you don't want to read it, here's the version that I think works best.
My favorite Marvel animated series of all time is one that kind of flew under the radar. It was done in the mid-'90s. It was part of the Marvel Action Hour, and it was the Fantastic Four half of that hour. They aired an episode of an Iron Man-based show and an episode of Fantastic Four show. And the first season is kind of clunky. They do take a lot of inspiration from the source material of the comic books, but the second season things really pick up. And I particularly point to the interpretation they use of Dr. Doom, who is voiced by Simon Templeman, who's a terrific, terrific voice actor. In the first season, they had 2 actors voice Dr. Doom. One of them being a guy, I believe his name was Neil Ross, not really well known, and kind of did just a generic evil voice. And the other was John Vernon, who is famous for playing the role of Dean Wormer in Animal House, who you talked about on this show a few episodes back. Also, ironically enough, has done the voice of Iron Man on an animated series, and the voice of General Thunderbolt Ross, nemesis of the Hulk. But he neither of those clicked with Dr. Doom. But in season 2 of the Fantastic Four show, they introduced Simon Templeman as his voice, and from just taking some of the great Doom stories from the comic and Templeman just crafting a perfect vocal pitch for Doom in any moment, that really won me over as to why this became my favorite. And I actually posted a video on your Facebook wall, Robert. I don't know if you saw it.
I've seen it. I watched
but
it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it because it focused on him, not so much, poorly written dialogue and some of the other voice actors. Mid-90s animation. What are you going to do?
Yeah, but for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a YouTube video called Dr. Doom is Grandiloquent. And that's the best word you can use to describe it, because this is a villain who has probably the biggest ego this side of a Bret Hart or a Ric Flair, to use some wrestlers who people probably are familiar with and who know about ego trips. This guy, his shit does not stink. And he is the greatest thing since sliced bread. He's the cat's pajamas, and he knows it, and he believes it. And the way he words it and the vocal presence that Templeman gives is incredible. And if you haven't seen it, just look up this video if you never saw that show. If you don't know anything about Dr. Doom, whenever you hear his voice in your head when you're reading a comic, this is the voice you're going to hear from now on.
Well, thank heavens, because for a while it was Julian McMahon, and kind of the less said about it, the better. But
I'm sorry, I just had an aneurysm.
I mean, he's the only guy, apart from, we don't really count the unreleased film because it was unreleased. Consequently, not a lot of people saw it. But when they released the first Fantastic Four movie, and I forget the year, you might know it off the top of your head.
The Roger Corman one or the Julian McMahon one?
The Julian McMahon one.
2005.
2005, thank you. When they released that, that was kind of the... Okay, you just brought up that you were kind of a fan of Marvel in general and Doom in particular. Were you when this came out, when that movie came out, were you interested? Were you hyped? Were you excited to see the Fantastic Four finally debut on the big screen?
I was extremely excited because, not only is Doom one of my favorite characters, Ben Grimm is probably, for anyone who's felt like an outcast, the most relatable character ever written. And I think as a whole, Fantastic Four, through its first, 25, 30 years or so, is the most well-written comic book in all the medium. It really does depict the great American novel in many respects. So I was extremely excited. I thought the casting was well done, and that included Julian McMahon, because I was familiar with the show that really gave him his big break in Nip Tuck, where he played a very cocky, arrogant surgeon, and was just really a complete, heel of a man. And I thought, there's a chance this guy can play the role really, really well, because the role he plays on Nip Tuck is a vain, superficial, egotistical, but highly intelligent but flawed character. So you're thinking it's a perfect mix to step into this role of Victor Von Doom.
And instead...
And instead, you get him kind of almost, I imagine Julian McMahon had never read a comic book in his life, because his version of Dr. Doom seemed like it would have fit fine on the 1960s Batman to me, where he was just completely overplaying it, and either he went one direction or the other. He was completely overplaying his role, or he just seemed completely disinterested and not even trying. I don't think the writing helped, in which the writing based the Von Doom character more off of the Ultimate Marvel version that debuted in the 2000s that really was not well received by fans. And
he had goat hooves.
Yeah, part of that reason would be the goat hooves.
For those of you who don't know, just as a brief backstory, in the original Fantastic Four canon, in the comic lore, Doom is not on the spaceship with the rest of the Fantastic Four. He does not get hit with the cosmic dust cloud and all of the things that go along with that. He develops his powers based strictly on his own skill. He winds up going through a bunch of different... he's a native of Latveria. His mother was a witch, so he has some mystical leanings, but he gets... there's like a group of monks involved, and he just basically, being a genius, figures out, hey, I can make this armor. He winds up mastering magic. It all kind of comes about in his own personal quest. He does it on his own, as opposed to being hit with cosmic radiation, which he is in the film and as mentioned in the Ultimates version. So to anyone who didn't know that, I apologize for interrupting.
Yeah, instead of the great backstory we get from the comics, we get the very simplified, he's a rich guy who's using his money and power to control the people around him, including his big intellectual rival who hasn't had the financial success and backing that he has in Reed, and the object of his desire, Susan Storm, who used to date Reed, and now he tried to date her, but it didn't work, so he's going to try to do this to impress her, and it really makes the character so one-dimensional that it strips away everything that makes him unique and fun.
Well, I think it was Mark who mentioned this. I don't remember the podcast we were discussing it on. But he mentioned that he felt like when Julian McMahon was out there, they just put the camera in front of him and said, be the character from Nip Tuck, as opposed to actually trying to create a unique character in the form of Victor Von Doom. And it's one of those things that becomes obvious once you start looking at it. I mean, some guys in positions like that go out there and they're able to, kind of embellish and imbue a character, and I can never pronounce the guy's name, but the actor who played Reed Richards in the Fantastic Four film, I felt did a great job because he was kind of underwritten, but what he was able to do as an actor was at least bring the character to life, make it feel like, yes, this is a real person, and Michael Chiklis acting through the huge bodysuit that he was wearing as the Thing. Just, guys who were able to kind of do something with maybe lesser writing material or direction, and then you had Julian McMahon who was just kind of there for the money. It was the impression I got. I mean, maybe you feel differently.
No, I think that's a pretty dead-on commentary. There was good in that terrible movie, and the good in that movie were Mr. Fantastic Iron Gruffudd, which is, I believe, how you pronounce his name, but I can't be sure. Michael Chiklis is the Thing, and Johnny Storm, Chris Evans. I enjoyed those.
We can't get him back because now he's Captain America and he can't be both. But that was a well-written version of Johnny Storm, and Chris Evans. I don't know if he did a bunch of research on his own to get it right, but he, from what I understand, nailed the character, and his interactions with Michael Chiklis, which is a big part of elements of not just that movie, but the whole canon from the whole series, the kind of big brother, little brother, quasi-antagonistic relationship that those two have.
It's straight out of the comics. That was extremely well done. Those guys, you could see they were having fun with it, and it translated well. And that was great. The problem is, again, we mentioned Doom is the penultimate. He's the ultimate nemesis to the Fantastic Four, and particularly Reed Richards. And to do justice
one of the reasons I do this, I mentioned this, but one of the reasons I do this, by and large, a film or a franchise or a story or whatever medium you choose to put in there, there's a pretty obvious limiter on it. If it has to reach X level, and X level tends to involve the villain of the franchise. If it's not done right, everything else suffers, and it's very obvious. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead and go back to your point.
No, but that's kind of the point, is when you don't have that captivating villain for your heroes to deal with, the movie tends to fall apart, or any medium for that matter. It could be a novel, a movie, television, theater, what have you. It falls apart because there's no interest in that point, and there's no dimension to the character. It becomes... And it should be a story more about your heroes than it is your villains. But when you're given no context to really care about the motivations of the villain, or if they're very shallow and underdeveloped, you don't have anything you should care about.
All right, now, I have to ask you, have you seen Rise of the Silver Surfer yet?
I did. I didn't see it in theaters because I was still very disappointed with the initial offering. So I eventually waited for it to come on TV and saw it in that sense, and kind of hoped for something better at that point.
Well, that movie went a step further. Let me say this. I didn't hate Galacticus changing from a guy with a weird helmet in a spaceship to a Lovecraftian monster from deep space. I'm okay with that. I understand why people aren't. That didn't bother me personally. My issue was more, okay, first of all, you have everybody comes back, including Julian McMahon, which in this case, it's one of those, normally even in a movie like this, in comic book films and whatnot, when you feel like the bad guy is manipulating you, in this case he manipulates the army into trusting him, he can help you beat the Silver Surfer, going to cause the destruction of the world, which, hey, we don't want that. But whenever the villain is manipulating the system or the good guys, you always feel like smacking the people for believing him because he's a villain. That's what they do. They double-cross you. They burn you. They're self-centered, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, it felt even worse. It didn't feel like, my God, why are you listening to the villain? You're an idiot. It felt like, why are you listening to this guy? He's an idiot. I mean, look at him. You're going to trust the fate of your planet with this guy. And then you had Lawrence Fishburne as just the voice actor for the Silver Surfer and a whole host of other problems. But
don't call him Samuel L. Jackson.
I know the difference.
Okay, because apparently most people don't, I guess. No, but in regards to what you're saying, too, it would make sense that they would have to go to Doom in the comic canon because they know Doom is as intelligent as he says. In the movies, he's made out to be quite a dullard, especially in comparison to Reed. And so they already have Reed, but they decide to listen to this guy. It completely made no sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, Jesse Starcher, who's playing the home game, did not like the Galacticus cloud, which I can see. That the vision of Galacticus in the comics doesn't translate necessarily well to film, so changing that into, again, a Lovecraftian type monster was okay with me, but that's also just me. You're all your mileage. But as far as Doom goes, they kind of hybridized the two stories from what I understand, as far as the comics go, in that you had the coming of Galacticus, and you also had Doom taking the board from the Surfer, which allowed him access to his cosmic power. And, from what I saw from stuff you've posted and my own little bit of research, when Doom got the board, which, again, ignore kind of the silliness of surfboarding. When he got the board, he went around and he made every nation individually succumb to his will, or he would destroy them. And in the comics, he does nothing. Sorry, not in the film, he does very little with. Whereas in the source material, here's his opportunity to capitalize on global domination, which he has stated more than once is his goal, and he takes it, and he runs with it, and in the film, we get him beat up by Super Skrull. I mean, am I misremembering?
Again,
or is
no. This is dead on. and again, you're talking about basically the combining of three stories, because in reality, when they all, stupidly merge their powers into one Johnny Storm, and they do the transfer of powers, which it didn't make any sense in the movie. It doesn't make any sense outside of the movie. It's about Doom. They're basically taking the Super Skrull story that was an early Fantastic Four story and didn't involve Doom, the coming of Galactus, which did not directly involve Doom, and one of the great Dr. Doom stories where he's able to trick the Silver Surfer into stepping into a machine he's built that allows him to transfer the power cosmic, which is the power the Silver Surfer is imbued with by Galactus, into Doom. And again, as you said, Doom goes around basically conquering every world nation and making himself omnipotent on Earth, at least for a little while, because that's his ultimate goal, is to rule the world, and not because he's evil, but because he genuinely believes that the world is a better place with him in control, which is kind of one of the fun points about him. He doesn't believe what he's doing is wrong or evil. He's doing it because he feels it's the greater good, and that he's the greater good as a whole. In the movies, he does jack shit with it and then gets beaten up.
Yeah, and the kind of defeating blow is a depowered Ben Grimm knocking him into Hudson Bay with a crane. I mean, if memory serves, I believe that's how that particular sequence ends.
Imagine if Darth Vader, beat up Luke, slapped everybody around, and R2-D2 made him stub his toe and he fell into, an epic cosmic black hole. That's pretty much what you got there. Oh,
man, that is an amusing visual. I will give you that. Vader has conquered everyone. He's thrown the Emperor down the hole. Now I rule the Empire, bitch. And then R2 comes out and shocks him, and he falls over.
That's the best thing I could liken it to.
Yeah. Okay. Now, since there's a new Fantastic Four movie coming out, and this is not the place to get in, and I've debated this and seen the debates of other people with, Black Johnny Storm and White Sue Storm. That doesn't bother me as long as they actually bother to address the fact that this can happen, and that's just me personally. If you say they're stepbrother and sister, or one's adopted, or however you want to do it, as long as they're still siblings and you at least bother to write in an explanation as to why you have deviated from 60 years of canon, I'm okay. Doesn't bother me in the least. Stuff like that gets changed all the time. Whiny little British techno dweeb is Ben Grimm, not so much, but that's a completely different story. But as of right now, they have not announced either if Doom will be involved or who they may have cast or offered the roles. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you could choose anyone available, personally, if I could choose anyone, I'd go with Michael Fassbender because I think he could do it. And that's not just because I'm a huge fan of Michael Fassbender. But he's Magneto, and they're in the same universe, so can't work. But your fantasy casting, and then who you think of the options available, assuming they're different.
See, I'm looking at it as I would want to try to be faithful to the source material, which is apparently the complete opposite of what this movie is out to accomplish. So it's a tough call. Somebody who's been brought to my attention recently for stuff he's done, and I'm not a fan of actually his big show, Sons of Anarchy, but I think Charlie Hunnam, if they put him in the role, would actually do a very good job.
Could he actually use his British accent?
He could, and that would, I think, add to it. That's part of why I kind of...
I feel so bad for that. I'm a fan of Charlie Hunnam. I've enjoyed most of Sons of Anarchy. I know what happens in the latest season. I wasn't able to watch it all, so I'm waiting for it to come out on Netflix. But you're not going to spoil anything if you tell me how it ends. I already know, because I looked it up. And Chris Jericho spoiled it for me on his podcast.
That's what you get for listening to Chris Jericho.
Yeah, to be fair, when he mentioned that he'd been out it had already happened like at least 2 months ago, and I consider that fair. I mean, I've mentioned spoilers that are going to happen on television shows that haven't happened yet because I know source material. Haha, Game of Thrones people. But the poor guy, I feel bad for him because everything he's in, they make him not speak with his natural accent. And some guys can pull that off very well. Andrew Lincoln from The Walking Dead is actually British. And I had no idea of that until I saw someone talking about it on Talking Dead. He does a good job. Hugh Laurie does a great job. He knows how to speak, American, so he knows the American accent. I feel bad for Hunnam because no one's let him do it with his normal speaking voice, and it's just you can just tell sometimes that it's kind of a strain for him.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, I'm not a huge Sons of Anarchy fan, but I'm familiar with Sons of Anarchy, and he's kind of almost playing a Hamlet-type role in that show.
That show is just Hamlet over Seven Sins done with bikers, which should tell you where it's going to anyone who doesn't know.
But Doom is very much kind of in the mold of a very grandiose Shakespearean bad guy, and I think he would do a really good job if given the opportunity.
I don't disagree. I hadn't thought of him, but that could work really well. And, okay, Jesse Starcher is pinging me with comic covers. I assume these are things he wants to at least discuss a little bit. Now, we've mentioned Doom, all-encompassing villain all over the Marvel Universe, which means he gets to appear in all of those fun little one-shots like Marvel Zombies and What If and alternate universes and so on and so forth. So I'm assuming you are aware of all of his appearances in most of those, or how some of those work. What ones of those do you enjoy seeing, alternate takes, so to speak, on Doom?
Some of them are pretty interesting, and Starcher actually posted one, so I give you credit, Jesse, for bringing this up so we can bring it into the discussion. In the early 90s, Marvel came out with a series of Marvel 2099, where it was a dystopian 2099 is the year future, and certain characters were reinterpreted into that years. You had the X-Men of 2099, you had Spider-Man of 2099, it's probably the most well-known. But again, because he's such a stalwart character, there was Doom 2099. And unlike the other characters, this was actually still Victor Von Doom, who had been plucked from time and brought to the future, and kind of got to play the role of anti-hero more so than villain. And because the future at this point was so screwed up, his vision of what was better was actually for the greater good. And it was a pretty interesting thing to see, Doom in the future adapting and dealing with the people who had taken over Latveria in that time. And he sought to free Latveria from what he felt was an even worse reign than his own. And I think the citizens would agree. He made alliances with the X-Men of 2099 to liberate the United States from an evil corporation that had taken it over. And it again shows
just anti-mutant? I don't mean to cut you off, but I seem to recall him being anti-mutant or another.
He's not anti-mutant. He has been able to do things like create a device that can neutralize mutant powers by altering someone's genetic mutations, and he's dealt with the X-Men on occasion, which again shows just how much he encompasses. The X-Men, more than anyone, tend to be put off into their own little world, independent of everyone, but Doom's even managed to get in there a few times. And he's even kind of backhandedly complimented Magneto a time or two, so he's not really an anti-mutant person. I think that perception just kind of comes from him being a little bit Eastern Blockish, where the location of Latveria is, and people just lumping him in with Nazis and such. But he's not anti-mutant. And
that was just, again, that was something I've read, how I believe specifically the one I'm referencing is like Age of Apocalypse, or things of that nature, wherein or doesn't he do something with the House of M, where he wants to like get rid of all of where either he opposes repowering all of the mutants? I don't know. Again, my research was not incomplete, but it was a bit rushed due to other circumstances. Some of this information may be jumbling in my head inaccurately.
Yeah, and then to be fair, it's difficult to keep up with 50-some-odd years of continuity when you have to cram for a show like we are, and you're not necessarily as invested in the singular character the way I am. And Age of Apocalypse would be another alternate reality. House of M, sort of an alternate reality. Not a real fully fleshed out idea, unfortunately, that caused a lot of headaches. But yeah, Star Trek brought up Doom 2099, and that's one interpretation. There have been others, like
Oh, hey, I don't mean to. Well, I kind of do mean to cut you off because I'm cutting you off. But we've got a caller here that I feel like that I suppose we should take. Area code 512. You're on the air, and we're talking Dr. Doom. What do you got?
Dr. Doom, the greatest
Jeff.
villain of all time. I'm just going to say, all you Star Wars fanatics out there, all you Warsies, you're welcome. Because without Darth Vader would have never been created. So you're welcome that George Lucas committed wholesale theft against Stanley and Jack Kirby, stealing Dr. Doom and turning him into Darth Vader. Am I wrong here?
Well said, Jeff. Well said.
Anyway,
those of you who don't know, Mr. Jeff Harris has joined the podcast.
And I just wanted to chime in really quick. My favorite Dr. Doom story is Doom Quest, this story where Dr. Doom and Iron Man get sent back in time to the times of Arthurian legend, and they team up with King Arthur against Morgan Le Fay. And Doom and Iron Man actually have to work together in order to save each other and get back to their present timeline. And I always just thought that was interesting, when a great hero and a great villain they're forced to work together out of necessity, in order to help each other out because they're at a stalemate and they have a common goal. So that's just kind of one of my favorite stories of that type. And it's
Jeff, I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, just let me finish really quick. The reason I like that story because I think it's the first time I remember Dr. Doom actually admits that Tony Stark is a brilliant mind, and that, it just shows that, these two are brilliant. If they can put aside their differences, they can achieve something great. And that's just kind of the issue with Doom. He kind of lets his pride and ego get in the way of a lot of things. But go ahead.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff, because you have to, at some point, and I'm surprised it took as long as it did, Doom and Iron Man visually are natural rivals because of the issue of them both being armored techno-savants, if you will. And it took a while for them to do that storyline in Iron Man over the two issues that it took place. And it's always a very cool matchup because they are both geniuses in their own right. And to see them have to work together and build a time machine out of the pieces of their armor was very, very interesting, and they're kind of natural rivals in many respects, almost the same way Reed and Doom are, because while Reed is kind of a road that Doom could have taken had he gone one way with his abilities, Tony Stark and Doom almost did go the same way in that they're very egotistical, self-destructive people because of their ego. And I think the great quote from that when you brought up how Doom actually does give Stark some credit is that because, it's not known at that time that Stark is Iron Man, Doom says something to the effect of, if Stark's bodyguard is actually this intelligent, Stark himself must be an incredible genius, or something to that effect.
That sounds about right.
And the only other thing I loved Dr. Doom's appearance on Earth's Mightiest Heroes because in his very first appearance, the Fantastic Four and the Avengers go up against him, and none of them are a match for him, and he's just a regular guy. He's wearing a suit of armor, but I just like this idea that Doom is so brilliant, he can think up all these things from his own mind come up with a way to stand up to the Hulk, the Thing, and he unlocked the secrets of the Skrull invasion before anyone else. So I always liked sort of Doom being this ultimate brilliant opportunist that's always basically one step ahead of everybody, and he really knows what's going on more than everyone else. But I think this is a great topic this week, Robert. So thank you, and I will leave you guys to it.
All right, Jeff. Thanks for calling in.
Have a good night, Jeff.
Actually, that kind of dovetails. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, Jeff, in one sense, brought up a very good point that we didn't yet discuss, and that's one of the things about Doom is that he's absolutely loathed by essentially every hero because of how many of them he's crossed paths with. But whenever there's something world-ending on the horizon, they know begrudgingly that at some point they're going to turn to him for assistance. And it's happened with Onslaught in the comics in the 90s. It happened recently with what they've been referring to as the Apocalypse Twins in the current storyline in Uncanny Avengers. And it's happened several times where they just know, like, damn it, we have to do this, and they approach Doom for help.
Yeah, he's been approached more than once, and frequently will just ignore. I mean, that's the other thing. I kind of want to bring this up with you because portrayals of Doom, depending on the writer, have gone kind of one of two ways, and I want your take on this since you followed the character so much. But the initial conception of him is a very, again, while he's evil, while he's going, he wants to rule the world. He wants to rule the world. He wants to subjugate the world to his will because he believes his will and his vision is the best thing possible for all parties involved. And he hates Reed Richards because Reed's smarter than him, even hypothetically. I mean, again, we're on bad guys here. You ask me who's smarter, I'm probably going to say Doom because I tend to side with the villain, which I am wont to do. But more than once when he's been approached, if it does, sorry, I jumped back on the wrong track there. But the one of the versions of him depicts a man who has a very deeply seated code of honor, in that if he gives you his word, he will stick to his word. Granted, it's exactly to his word, so you want to be very careful about how you word things. Or he helped Spider-Man. He saved Spider-Man because Spider-Man saved him. He allowed just all of these little things that, because of his personal code of honor, make sense. And then there's the other version wherein his sole purpose in life is to prove that he's smarter than Reed Richards. And I believe the quote is, if he could prove that by ripping the head off a newborn baby and eating it like an apple while his mother watches, he would do so if it proved he was smarter than Reed. I'm curious which of those two kind of base philosophies, and the character, it's still more or less the same character. It's things within him that are very subtly altered to fit the kind of perspective of the writer. I'm curious which of those versions resonates with you. Which do you prefer? Are there other versions of him that you either are aware of or would like to see done?
I tend to lean more towards the former. The ripping off of a newborn baby's head is one that comes from Mark Waid, who wrote Fantastic Four for a time. And I think Mark Waid's a terrific writer, but I think that just cheapens Dr. Doom as a character, that's what it all boils down to. And I think Mark Waid, as great as he is, doesn't really understand the motivations behind the creation of the character. I think Doom, I don't think he's honorable. I don't think he's noble. I think he has what are his senses of nobility and honor and his own code of ethics that he thinks are ethical and really aren't. And there's been multiple times where that's seen. And I think that's kind of the right way to depict him and look at him, where he the thing about bad guys is they don't have to convince you that they believe what they're doing is right. They have to convince you that they believe what they're doing is right. And that's, to me, been the key element of Dr. Doom in all his iterations through various writers and titles, is that anything Doom does, he believes is right. Why? Because he believes it's right. And that's all there is to it. There's a lot of touching on where Doom's motivations come from. One of them is to free the soul of his mother, who was one of the only people in this world who, loved him, and she was killed and murdered and persecuted for reasons he didn't understand. And now that he believes to understand her, reasons why he's donned a suit of armor and, racked up quite a body count, among other things. But he has his own code that only he really understands and only he really adheres to, but believes everybody else should. And I think that's the proper interpretation of Doom. And I think guys like John Byrne and even going back to the original Fantastic Four issues are the ones who really nailed it and hit it on the head.
Okay. Now, since we're kind of bringing up some of the one-shots or interesting things that he's been involved in, some of them are what-ifs, which Marvel gets to have a lot of fun with. I mean, personally, I have to imagine that working at Marvel or DC or places like that, working in strict continuity must be one of the most exhausting things in the world. Just because of not just how much you have to keep up with, but how much you have to keep consistent and the expectations that have been set before. I mean, it must be exhausting. Whereas something like, these what-ifs or Marvel Zombies or these little, like, one-shot prestige titles or whatnot, or however you choose to phrase them, that's got to be just a lot more fun to kind of delve into. And I just kind of want to run through some of these with you here. The first one, what if Dr. Doom had become a hero instead of a villain? I don't know if you've read that one or not, but if you have, just kind of your thoughts on that one. Because he's a guy who could very easily be a hero, all things considered.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, and granted, you got to remember, some of these stories I haven't read in, quite a few years, so I might be a little bit rusty on the plot details. But if I remember correctly, in What If Dr. Doom Became a Hero, because that's the ones I haven't read in a while, what if Doom had listened to Reed Richards about fixing his machine that was his astral projection machine that was going to help him find his mother's soul. And what he does is alter it, the experiment's a success, and he finds his mother's soul in hell. As a bonus, Reed kind of manages to stop the machine from blowing up and destroying his face. He takes off from, Empire State University and is searching for a way to, try to find his mother's soul. But this time he's not bitter about the accident. He doesn't have hate for Reed Richards. They give him a different suit of armor, and, he tries to do this ritual that saves his mom's soul. He deposes the evil ruler of Latveria, and he takes over again. He saves the gypsies who are in the dungeon, including his one-time girlfriend, Valeria, who's kind of an important part of his history, too. And he's going to get married, and so basically Doom has to decide either he can give up his own soul or give up the souls of all the people he's freed, because Mephisto, the ruler of hell, is pissed that Doom took everything he wanted, and Mephisto can't deal with that. So Doom basically becomes Doom again and figures that the world can't live without him. So he lets Mephisto have his girlfriend Valeria. And, again, he just can't ever... He just can't ever be good. He always has that twinge in him where he thinks what he's doing is right, and so he gets. I think there's even a thing where he tries every year to free her soul, but he always fails, and it's funny. But this is again a John Byrne story too, who really kind of understands Doom, and so I think that's one of your more accurate depictions, even though it's a what if.
Well, yeah, I have to imagine it's fun, but you still, if you understand the character, then playing with one-shots and what-ifs becomes fun because you understand the character so you can tweak with it, and as long as you're true to it, at least, it still works. The other one I want to touch on is What If Dr. Doom Had Become the Thing, which is the other comic cover that Jesse Starcher posted on our Facebook account while playing the home. So, have you read that one recently? Do you remember how that one goes, or... And if so, thoughts?
Basically, again, it goes back to the experiment that led to Doom becoming Doom. And Doom himself is the one who notices the error this time, and it never happens. And him and Reed become friends in college, and Ben Grimm is kind of left out of everything. So Reed's going to take the space flight that would transform everyone into the Fantastic Four, and Dr. Doom gets to go on board instead of Ben. So Doom, being Doom in an act of self-preservation, puts on armor that he thinks are going to save him from the cosmic radiation that he learns about ahead of time, while the rest of the crew might die and he doesn't really care. So the ship, as usual, is bombarded by cosmic rays and crash lands. But they change it where the crash happens where the gamma bomb is being set off that would turn the Hulk into the Hulk. So Ben Grimm, who became a military man and is working on the project, sees Reed and Doom, and he's like, oh, my God, my friends from college, what is this? And he tries to run out and help. The bomb goes off, and Ben Grimm is bombarded by gamma rays and becomes the Hulk. Doom, being Doom, finds out that the miscalculations that plagued him once plagued him at a different time because his armor, instead of protecting him, magnified its effect, and he becomes the Thing. He fights the Hulk, and while he's winning, it turns out that the Hulk gets stronger as he gets madder, and he knocks him out.
Who'd have thought?
Who'd have thought? And it becomes kind of an ultimate moment of comeuppance where everything that Ben could have had, and Ben seemingly gets it even worse, he still gets to knock Doom on his rear end unconscious.
Yeah, just kind of speaking of the Fantastic Four, like you mentioned, anyone who's ever felt like the outcast, Ben Grimm is kind of he's the character that resonates the most. Because the poor guy, he can't turn off. Everyone else gets to kind of turn off and on their abilities that they gain from cosmic radiation, and for whatever reason, he's just stuck as the Thing. I mean, kind of the supreme irony there being that Doom actually figured out how to reverse the process once or twice, which another thing that Reed can't do. If we're comparing brain pans here, if we're comparing brain pans, Doom can make Ben Grimm normal again. You can't.
But we compared brain pans, but one of my favorite Doom kind of standalone stories is Doctor Strange, Triumph and Torment, because that really is the first time you really get to see Doom cut loose with his magic, and what the plight of that, what it can lead to, and just how dangerous he is as a whole, because everybody knows him for the techno genius that he is, but the fact is, this story establishes that Doom is the second best sorcerer in the world.
Which he achieved in his spare time. While running a country. As a brief aside, that's another what if. He could have become Sorcerer Supreme.
And there is a what if about that. There is a what if issue about what if Doom had become Sorcerer Supreme, but again, Stephen Strange's focus was entirely to becoming the Sorcerer Supreme of this world. That was everything. He wasn't a surgeon anymore. He wasn't doing anything but studying magic. Doom, aside from conquering Latveria, running his various experiments, fighting seemingly every superhero that he can, also decides to become a sorcerer and becomes just a shade behind Strange in that regard. And they compete in this contest where they're going to decide Sorcerer Supreme. So they go through it. Eventually, Strange comes out ahead, but he's really impressed with what Doom can do. And the rules of the contest are that the winner has to grant the loser a wish, basically. So Doom's wish is that they have to go to Mephisto's realm and rescue the soul of his mother. Doom, being Doom, of course, takes Strange down with the intent the whole time that knowing he has to replace his mother's soul with someone else's, he's just going to use Strange, so that way not only does he get his mom back, but he's also Sorcerer Supreme. So he's completely self-serving here. And he actually accomplishes this, but his mother was so pissed at him, and this is kind of maybe the biggest weak spot of Dr. Doom, is that he's a mama's boy at heart, and his mother is so pissed and heartbroken by what he did that she refuses to leave, and he has to take Strange back with him.
Well, we mentioned him studying magic. I believe he started that not just as a way of becoming a better villain, so to speak, but because he didn't think Reed Richards ever could. So if he could master magic, that would also prove once and for all that he was smarter than Reed. Of course, Reed does wind up with an understanding of magic after Strange coaches him. But
which again, he didn't do it on his own.
How is it that works? He learns how to master magic because Reed is the most scientifically minded person in the world. He can't, and magic works on the power of belief within the Marvel universe. And because of his logic-based mind, he can't make it work until Strange convinces him that the only way to make it work is to accept that you can't understand it.
And again, Richards, there's nothing wrong with being second best.
Even though he's bested him, that's the other thing about it. No one beats Doom except Reed. For whatever reason, nobody else can get one up on this guy.
That's one of the great things about him, is that he can be quote unquote defeated, but you never really see him outright beaten, outsmarted, physically just incapable of fighting back, except for when he deals with Reed.
It's one of the amusing things, and one of the things that works well within the context of the character, and that he's driven not only to accomplish his goals, but to prove that he's better than Reed Richards. But yeah, I mean, Spider-Man might be able to, maybe win a fight or thwart a plot. The Thing can, crush his hands or punch him across a continent. I don't know. But even the Avengers, the X-Men, they never defeat him to the point where he has to hit the reset button, so to speak. Except for Reed, who is, for whatever reason, able to outsmart or outmaneuver him. He's the one who gets him to give up control of the surfboard. Hey, look, So you've got ultimate power on this world. How about that world? Flies out, oh crap, the surfboard can't penetrate this barrier galactic cassette that's in the atmosphere, and now I've lost contact.
And that's kind of just the ingenuity of Reed taking advantage of the insecurity of Doom, because the one thing Doom's never been able to accept, and the one thing that's always haunted him more than anything, even except for with maybe the exception of his mother's soul, is that Reed was right when it came to his experiment, and he miscalculated, and as a result, he was scarred for life by it. And that scar is like a scarlet letter to him that always implies that Reed is smarter. And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that he loses to Reed at that point, because he refuses to accept it, but he has this permanent bearing of one moment of superiority in just a really kind of non-combative sense, because they were not Mr. Fantastic and Dr. Doom. They were just Reed Richards and Victor Von Doom, two students at Empire State University when it happened. But it's this forever bearing note that, you know what, on this day, he was smarter than you. And you'd never had to deal with that before. You've never really had to deal with it since. And you keep coming up against this guy, and you lose sight of what really matters, and that's why he's always able to trump you. Even though he's been able to do things like conquer the world in the graphic novel Emperor Doom, where he uses the Purple Man's mind control and amplifies it and takes control of everybody, that's not even enough for him, because he doesn't want to rule a world like that by zombie subversion, I think is how he refers to it. So he eventually allows Wonder Man to break out of mind control and beat him, but it's because he allows it. He basically takes a dive. But
I'm
against
just tired
Reed,
of living like this. So you're acceptable.
Yeah, but against Reed, he just never is able to completely cross that bridge and come up with a moment of pure victory over him. He's had times where Richards has had to reach out for help to him, and he milks those moments, but it's not a case of him outsmarting him like he really wants to, and he doesn't even really want to best him in physical combat. He just wants to show that one time he was smarter, because for the rest of his life he's bearing this mask because Reed was smarter.
Because, if he was self-aware, he could realize that you were just too arrogant to listen to and try to get help. But at that point, you're dealing with a completely different character because elements of his personality have been altered.
Yeah, and Doom with anybody but Richard, Doom is so much more into the intellectual battle than he is the physical. Like, Doom has had, times where he refuses to say he's going to sully his hands with people, like the Hulk or Ben Grimm, because you know that the guy is an intellectual at heart and wants to prove that I can outsmart anybody. And actually now I'm looking at Jesse Starcher playing the home game, and he comes up with one that's pretty good that kind of solidifies it. I am more than amused by the prospect of a battle of wits, though I fear that with you as an opponent, the struggle might well be brief.
I'd challenge you to a battle of wits, but you appear to be unarmed.
Yeah.
But I'd go further. Even any combination of characters not involving Reed Richards, Doom tends to get the best of them. It's not even, a close fight. He generally wins. It takes some spectacular maneuvering if you don't have his kryptonite, so to speak.
Only the real elite level, of powerhouses have been able to not be beaten by him. And you have to go into, the recent Thor series where Doom and Loki kind of forged a little bit of an alliance so that Doom could experiment on Asgardians to kind of unlock the secrets of their physiology and what makes them so much more than human, and invent his own version of the Destroyer, whereas Thor, who was at the time still wielding what's called the All-Power, or as it was known when he had it, the Thor Force, he smashed the Doom Destroyer and was on the verge of going through Doom until Doom was teleported out by Loki. But when you have to pull Thor as an example of one of the few people who's ever physically gotten the best of Doom, that speaks pretty highly of him as a combatant. And even to the point where on, the Secret Wars were largely Doom's story, because this godlike being, the Beyonder, Doom did everything he could and stole, cheated, lied in order to steal this guy's power, much the way he did to the Surfer, accomplished it, and basically became a god.
And then, what was it that brought him down in that? I remember reading about that one.
He just wasn't able to sustain control of the powers, and the Beyonder took him back from him.
The only thing that held him back was the innate physiology of being human.
And when he slept, because of his personality and his mindset, when Doom slept, he was still unleashing the power, but of destructive forces. But there's also another what if, where what if Doom had kept the power and harnessed it? And that's an interesting story in and of itself, where he actually he lives well into the future, even after the people who stayed on Battleworld had kids, and he deals with their kids, and basically, again, fights another 3,000-year war against the Beyonder and the Celestials, and goes well above and beyond anything you think someone human would be capable of. But you're not discussing the average bear, you're discussing Dr. Doom.
Yeah, I'm reading that. The brief synopsis of that establishes a paradise on Earth. He obtains the Infinity Gem, so at this point, though stopping him, defeats the Elders of the Universe, releases his mother's soul, beats the Celestials, returns to Earth, and decides to become benevolent. So he just beats himself, essentially. He has conquered everything there is to conquer and decides, well, maybe it'll be fun to be a good.
And Alexander looked around him and wept because there were no new worlds to conquer.
Oh, man, that's... Well, that's kind of crazy when you... I mean, just again, there's... for a villain to have just, like, one weakness, and that weakness be your antith... I mean, that's not even true of most other characters, most other... even supervillains. Even if you take, guys like Thanos or Apocalypse, or Magneto, or, however you want to... It's very rare that you get a guy who has just one weakness. I mean, any of the other ones... I mean, Superman, it's not just kryptonite. Luthor outsmarts him more than once. Doomsday kills him, ostensibly.
He has no bonus against magic.
It's true. So Doom would beat Superman.
Clearly.
And he would then mind control Lex Luthor. I don't even want to think about him in the DC universe, because he just... of course, in the DC universe, the only one who could beat him would be Batman. Not just because he's Batman, but because, Batman thinks and is intelligent.
And he's willing to believe in things like magic.
Yeah, so again, Batman would be the only one who might stand a chance against him. But he's again, I kind of became more enamored with the character the more research I did for prepping for this podcast. And I'm not going to say best or worst of all, best of all time. I mean, he's thought of very highly, and sadly, I think the biggest thing holding him back is lack of experience in the mainstream. Whereas you have guys
I think that's due to the fact, and I hate to cut you off, but I think we can chalk that up due to the fact that he is thought of as the Fantastic Four's premier villain, and because there's never been a good mainstream interpretation of the Fantastic Four, it's always held him back. So once again, he loses to Reed Richards.
Or Sony executives, maybe?
Influenced by Reed Richards.
No, we'll hold back Dr. Doom, and if that means I have to be held back as well, I'm okay with that.
Did he really get held back, though? Because I thought he was probably the most enjoyable part of those movies. You see, the subtle brilliance of Richards strikes again.
It's true. I almost wish they'd just do him as a standalone Avengers villain. I mean, you've got the Age of Ultron coming up, and Ultron and Doom have collaborated in the past, yes?
In pseudo ways, yes. There's been things like the Acts of Vengeance and certain iterations of the Masters of Evil, but they're kind of too bad.
Ultron could turn out to be a Doom bot.
Oh, don't. Because now, if you say that, that's going to be the ending of the movie where you find out that Ultron all along was just a pawn by Dr. Doom. And it might restore my faith in the Avengers franchise at that point.
But, I mean, I'd almost rather they did him as a standalone Avengers villain, because he's he's theoretically a big enough name to warrant that type of, filmmaking.
He's been considered the Marvel villain, and before anyone says, well, no, he isn't, it's Norman Osborn or it's this guy, here's some examples for you. The first Marvel villain to ever have an action figure is Dr. Doom. He had the first bad guy action figure in the initial Mego series of dolls released in the 70s, and when Marvel followed up with a Secret Wars line, Doom, of course, had his action figure there. And when they got a toy contract with Toy Biz, which has since been their standing toy contract, it eventually became Marvel Toys, figures they put out, Doom was, of course, included. When they did their first ever crossover with DC, when they had Superman and the Amazing Spider-Man meet each other, the villains selected were Lex Luthor, obviously Superman's premier bad guy, and Dr. Doom, who's not a regular Spider-Man rogue, but because of his standing in the Marvel Universe, they chose him to be the guy. There's just endless examples of why Doom is, at the forefront of being Marvel's bad guy. Be it whenever they do a group poster, he's always the first bad guy included and the most visible. Any major event always needs his presence in it. It's when they did the Heroes Reborn reboot in 1996, God help us how awful that was, who was the main villain that they carried over? Dr. Doom.
Yeah, I don't. This is gonna get me all kinds of crap because I'm likely doing starting. I'm either gonna for next week, just a brief preview for next week. I'm either going back to Batman's Rogue Gallery and having some fun with that because I could do 3 podcasts on Batman's Rogues Gallery. You have the Joker who stands alone, then you have the A-list players, and then you have the B-list players, and I could do a podcast on each of them and fill it up with hypothetically speaking, with quality content. But the other one that the other one I'm considering doing is Spider-Man, because he actually has a surprisingly strong Rogues Gallery. And I just don't rate Norman Osborn that highly. That might just be, that's probably just me. Everyone else out there.
I didn't until he seduced Spider-Man's one true love before Mary Jane and made her and impregnated her and then killed her.
That's true. Green Goblin has done some horrible things, not the least of which being the Clone Saga.
Or knocking up his girlfriend and killing her. Even Doom thinks that's in poor taste. Come on.
So the first Spider-Man comics I ever read fell into the Clone Saga. So I actually read about Scarlet Spider-Man before I met Peter Parker, and to this day I maintain Ben Reilly's, but that's just me.
You and May Parker, that is.
Look, I understand that whole series gets a lot of flack, and maybe I have rose-colored glasses because again, that was the first one that I kind of watched, and I thought Kane was very impressively designed.
But you know who really is an impressively designed character? It's Dr. Doom.
Oh yeah, there's no comparison. You've got some of the most iconic one of the most iconic villains ever in Darth Vader was, as Jeff said, ripped off from Dr. Doom.
From the looks to the presence to certain things he could do, yeah, he's pretty much a wholesale Doom ripoff. Hate to break it to you guys, Jeff was the one who really went full force with it, and I appreciate him doing that. But yeah, when you inspire arguably the most popular villain in cinema history, who's a full-scale ripoff of you, you're a pretty damn good villain in your own right. And he's accomplished things that other villains just haven't been able to do, despite seemingly being more powerful, having more at their disposal. He's the only one who's really conquered the Earth and was its emperor. Yeah.
Like you said, he succeeded. He conquered the world, and it was a better place for a few glorious months.
He did it, but again, he's done, and to really solidify him as a bad guy, he has done his share of evil shit, such as probably the most evil act he ever committed was taking the love of his life, Valeria, one of the gypsy people of Latveria, who he loved as a teenager before he embarked on his quest that eventually turned him into the Good Doctor. And he sacrificed her soul to gain further knowledge of magics and the help of demons in their tutoring of it, because he knew this was power he would need eventually.
And he was subsequently tricked by Reed Richards into denying that they had helped him, and to get even with him, they locked him in hell until he fell through the dimension. But again, he commits evil, and Reed Richards is there to thwart him.
Damn Richards, he really is. Yeah.
All of Doom's major setbacks occur because of Reed Richards and no one else apparently, and it's one of those amusingly accurate things that works and it continues to work well with both with his character. It just feeds into his psychopathology of I have to prove I'm better because he's beaten me so many damn times, when he wouldn't have beaten you so many times if you weren't so fixated on it.
And again, there's an argument to be made from the context, and I'm not talking about pop culture and all that stuff and how recognizable. There's an argument to be made that Richards is your greatest hero in comicdom, and a lot of it has to do with how many times he's bested the schemes of Doom, who would erstwhile probably be ruling the world.
Well, I think there's a legitimate argument to be made for that. And the one that I keep coming back to, it deals with the World War Hulk storyline. After Hulk has set up his kingdom in Madison Square Garden, he has all the major members of the Illuminati and whatnot. He has Strange and Stark and Richards, and I think there's 2 other guys, and tells them all to fight to the death. And Reed wins. He doesn't kill them, but he emerges triumphant over those guys.
And Reed's not thought of as a physical combatant so much as he is an intellectual, but that doesn't mean he can't go ahead and throw down, and that's kind of taking a page out of the Doom book in that respect.
Yeah. All right. Since we're down to 14 minutes and change, so I'm going to ask, is there anything that we haven't kind of touched on that you feel compelled to kind of get out there, because you've managed not to throw any barbs at Mark Radulich and his time here talking about the Joker. So if you want to throw in a couple of jabs, and I will limit them to jabs, here's your chance.
Listen, there's a fine line between a murderous psychopath who's very good at that and the erstwhile ruler of not only the world but the universe. See, there's a scale, and it's a grandiose one. One of these guys deals with facing off against arguably the greatest mind in the history of minds and arguably the greatest hero based on what he's been able to accomplish. One of them deals with a guy who likes to abduct children and dress them up in tight outfits and dresses like a blind mammal and has never been able to best him. Oh, and he wears lipstick.
All right. I've mentioned this before. When I first decided, okay, I'll do a series on comic book villains, I mentioned that kind of my random thought was, okay, this will culminate with Pat and Mark debating Joker versus Doom, and I realized that's not going to happen. You just start screaming at each other. You'd have it would deteriorate so quickly. It's not even funny.
No, see, I don't think it would. I think you could organize this very, very easily. I think the best thing to do would be if you wanted to set aside a show eventually for this to be done, and maybe we have some other people who'd rank some contenders or whatever. But I think the best way to do it is if you gave us each, say, X amount of categories, and we each had a poll we each had, a timed response to these categories, and, we each traded off who goes first, who rebuts, et cetera, where at the end of, the X amount of categories, all things were equal. And it basically comes down to either your vote or if you wanted to put a panel of knowledgeable people together. I think that could work, and I'm very open to it. And
we're on the internet with a panel of knowledge.
That's fair, but, to Mark Radulich, I say, I am more than amused by the prospect of a battle of wits, though I fear that with you as an opponent, the struggle might well be brief.
All right. Is there anything that we haven't touched on as far as Doom goes that you want to touch on?
Just the idea that a lot of people think it's the armor that makes the man with Doom the same way they do Iron Man. But I would advise them to go and read the Doom miniseries that came out a few years ago. And Doom is basically stripped naked of his armor, and I mean he's completely naked, and he has to deal with a lion. He kills the lion with his bare hands by donkey punching it.
All right. Well, that's the way to go. I should just hit them as hard as you can.
It's not the armor that makes the man, folks. The only thing worthwhile to be learned from Iron Man 3.
Oh, come on. That wasn't the only worthwhile to be learned. We learned that Ben Kingsley is still a phenomenal actor.
That's not something that's to be learned. That's something that's to be known inherently.
Okay. I need to bring this up. I assume you're following along as well on this. But there is a comic cover that has been brought to my attention more than once. It's called the Super Team Family Presents. It's what would happen if Dr. Doom and the Joker decided to team up. And on the cover, it shows Batman and Reed Richards both dead because they can only achieve their goals if they're together. Something that it just looked. I don't know if this is a real thing or if it's something someone put together.
No, it's not a real thing.
That's sad because it should be.
I don't know about the results, but I'm very curious to see if that would play out as it appears to, with Reed Richards with a couple of bullet holes in his back and Batman with his head just pouring blood. And you know what, though? I can't imagine that would work with Joker with a smoking gun, because if anybody but Doom bested Richards, that just probably wouldn't be in their best interest.
I don't know if he could continue going on if someone else accomplished what he...
No, it's like when Ricky Steamboat beat Randy Savage for the Intercontinental Championship, and Savage was determined to keep the belt on Steamboat so that he could beat him back for it.
It was, yeah, I forgot that happened. Good old Randy Savage, non-drawing personality that he is.
In Latveria, yeah, doing a little thinking, yeah, huh?
God, now I'm imagining, now I've got this weird crossover thing in my head going.
Macho Doom, yeah, talking about you, Reed Richards, yeah, because if you was to come at me like a man, I would beat you intellectually. That would be okay. But no, you got eyes, you got lusting after Susan Storm, yeah, huh?
Okay, now I'm envisioning WrestleMania, what was it, 5 or 6? I think it was 5 where Savage and Hogan wrestled. Only now I've got Doom in Savage's corner and Richards in Hogan's corner. And they're the ones doing the talk instead of Savage and Hogan.
Oh, if only.
Yeah. All right, well, I'd like to thank you for being on, Pat. I like having you on. We always have good discussions, so thanks for being on. Thanks for, kind of opening, again, indirectly, but, getting ready for this, I realized that I was not as up to date and up to speed on it. One of the most awesome bad guys in comic book history, as I probably should have been. So I would like to thank you for bringing him, to the forefront of my attention. So thanks for that. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on or that you want to plug before we start wrapping up?
The pleasure was all mine, and of course the listeners feeling to travel through the impeccable history of one Victor Von Doom. If you go over to thecasualheroes.net, you can hear me and Gavin Napier discuss the wonderful world of boxing on yet another new edition of the Championship Rounds podcast. You can also go over to 411 Mania or here on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network at Blog Talk to hear me and Robert discuss this little thing called MMA every Sunday at 9 p.m. It's called the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show. Be there or be square.
And speaking of the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show, while Mark Radulich is in New York, sending the neighborhood to hell apparently, I'll be hosting this week. Pat will be on. I believe Jeff is planning on being on. And we're going to be reviewing UFC Fight Night Gustafsson Manoa. I maintain Jimmy Manoa's best chance for victory is a freak injury to Alexander Gustafsson. I don't care how much crap I take for that. I don't care how much crap I have to take for it. He could win other ways. I think that's the most likely. And we'll be previewing UFC 171, no buys. That's right, no buys. Which is an exaggeration, but that's actually a topic I plan on touching on at least briefly this Sunday. So tune in.
I'm so up for that.
So tune in for that. It'll be fun. For next week's Everyone Loves a Bad Guy, I mentioned it before, I'm either going back to Batman's Rogues Gallery, and incidentally I'll wind up giving Robert Cooper kind of his say on the Joker because it was just me and Mark for that one, and a lot of people wanted to be in on that one, but he was one of them. So I'm either doing that or I'm starting in on Spider-Man. I actually have a couple of people who've said they want to be in on Spider-Man, one of them being Benjamin J. Cologne, who you can find over at soulexo.com, that's SOULEXO. And he has done the occasional title card for The Long Road to Ruin, including rendering me as Michael J. Fox for Back to the Future. And I thank him for his kind artistic... No, but I had to be Mark. I just want to thank him for his kind artistic rendering. But he wanted to be on there, so if I'm on Spider, I just got to get with some and see who's available, who wants to be on for... that will determine what goes on next week. Locked in the Guillotine is my weekly column in the MMA zone of 411mania.com. It's up live right now. I break down the main card of the upcoming UFC Fight Night event. I talk briefly about the fights from the Tough China finale that I have seen. There's like 4 of them because I just don't want to sit through some of those fights, people. I'm sorry. My dedication only goes so far when it comes to random overseas cards with people I've never heard of, and never will again in some cases. And, okay, what was it?
Everybody from Tough China who didn't win.
In some cases, who did. Last thing. I'm in the current Fact or Fiction tournament in the MMA zone of 411mania.com. At last check, I was beating Alex Watt by a grand total of 3 votes. And I don't know if you're listening to this live and you haven't voted for me or him, God, I'm going to regret that one line, aren't I? But go read through it. Vote for who you think won. I feel I won, but hey, I'm biased. And I'm planning on making a deep run in the tournament of great significance this year. I believe I was eliminated in the first round last year, probably by Mark, because I always lose to Mark.
I lost to Alex Rella.
Well, apparently Mark lost to Todd Vogt, is losing as the voting stands right now, so anything can happen. But that's the only other thing I want to plug, so give that a look. Be on the lookout for that. If you're a wrestling fan, right now the 411 Wrestling Zone is counting down the 30 greatest matches in WrestleMania history. Number 30 up right now is Brock Lesnar versus Kurt Angle from WrestleMania 19. Apparently everyone thinks this should be in the top 5.
I'd say 12 or 10. I don't know about 5, but I'm picky.
But hey, it's also the internet, where everyone's opinion is exaggerated and has to be correct. But so if you're a wrestling fan, look forward to those. I've seen who's doing the write-ups for each of them. I've seen the finished list, so I know. But I will not tell you, because they'd get mad at me if I spoiled the reviews. You cheeky bastard. Oh, you can look it up, too. We have super secret staff for it. That's true. If you care enough, you can look it up. I don't know. But so there's that. Again, 411 Mania for all your pop culture needs. If you're a fan of wrestling or boxing, the Casual Heroes, Has a lot of good stuff over there, including, I'm led to believe, a forthcoming interview with Mick Foley, and they're still taking donations and sponsors for anyone interested in that, so hit them up. They're at thecasualheroes.com. And I believe that's all of my plugs for this week. I'll be back next week, and it's either going to be Spider-Man or Batman, unless something drastic happens and everyone says, no, wait, you can't do either of those. In which case, I'll come up with some other comic book-related thing. I might have Pat back and let him talk about the X-Villains, because he wasn't able to do so when we did it. Even though he's going to bag on everyone except everyone except Magneto.
I'll bag on quite a lot of them.
Damn
stinking muties.
Yeah, you're a racist. We all know it. It's okay.
How can I be racist? I hold dual citizenship in Latveria.
I can't be whenever someone asks me if I'm a racist, I hate the human race. Subdivisions within that race matter not.
All meal before doom.
Darn right. All are inferior to Doom, so why should I hate any of you more than anyone else? Just my opinion. All right, that's going to wrap things up for us. So for Pat Mullin, I am your authority on evil, Robert Winfree. I'll see you guys back here next week. Till then, remember, your hero is only as good as his villain. Your movie is only as good as its antagonist. Take note, Hollywood film producers who cast crappy actors in crappy roles that are poorly written. I'll see you guys next week.
So say good night to the bad guy.